In this video, I'm going to show you how to recreate an X-ray effect that looks like something from a real X-ray machine. In general, I think this aesthetic is super cool, and I just was browsing images and wanted to see if I could recreate it. And this is what I did. It got pretty close, and it gives us a lot of abilities to tweak colors and shapes and shades. And I think it looks pretty nice. So we're going to go through how I did that. In general, when I searched YouTube, there are a lot of tutorials on how to do it using a Fresnel or Fresnel shader. And overall, I thought that looked, it looks okay if you're trying to get like an Iron Man effect, but if you want like a real X-ray machine, it doesn't really do the job. So for example, this is using the Fresnel shader here. You can see it does the outlines and the edges are kind of thicker, kind of like in the real images where the edges are more bold or more visible. But overall, the density and the interiors, they don't look very good. So I'm going to basically just delete this, and I'm going to show you what I did to set up the scene. So first off, I just downloaded all these models for free off TurboSquid. There's basically a case, some packets, a gun, some ammo, a pill bottle with pills, some Ray-Bans, some clothes. It's pretty simple. And the main way we're going to achieve this effect is using volumetrics. So I'm going to just, I'm going to duplicate this case real quick, and we'll just look at this before looking at it with all the complicated objects in it. So let's look at this one. And if we just create a volume scatter and we plug that into the volume node right here for the output, you'll see it's already starting to look pretty good. In general, you do need to have a light here, or else there's nothing for the volume to catch. So basically, if this light was gone, there'd be nothing. So I just created a sunlight or I'll just recreate it so you can see. I just created a sunlight. Where is it? Here we go. And I just have it at the default pointing down, and I just pump it to 100 because I know we're going to need to catch a lot of light. So one other thing I did to this model was I added a solidify modifier. So if you look at the actual geometry we get, it is, let me remove this too. So you can see it's a nice piece of geometry, but it is kind of like hollow. And in general, if you don't have this and you have a volumetric on it, it basically treats it as a cloud. Basically, the whole thing is filled with volume. So if you download models, you make a model, you need to make sure you actually have a thickness to the wall. So that's why I added the solidify. And then the light will only catch on the walls instead of in the geometry. That's basically the essentials of it. I basically put this to 0.2, and in the world node, I made it black. And I'll delete this since we already have this. And yeah, so we basically have a bunch of objects in here. For this gun, I actually put a few more pieces of geometry inside of it. So you have these bullets that I put in there. I also added these little lines to make it look more complicated and that there's something actually inside of it so that when we render it, it doesn't appear, just as a shell of a gun. Obviously, you could spend more time, make it look more realistic. But that's basically the essential aspect of what this tutorial does. So I'm going to go ahead and render it. And the only last thing to note is in the camera, in general, I like to do orthographic or just have a really high focal length. This allows the image to look flat, similar to that reference that we were looking at. You can see there's really not much perspective that's shown. And then also in the render settings, obviously I'm in cycles, I use GPU. And transparency is actually important. So if you have a lot of geometry like I do now, I want to just bump this up. So I'm going to just make it 64. Honestly, you could even make it higher, do like 128, or then you don't even need to think about it ever again. And yeah, just for the noise samples, I cap it at 512. So I'm going to go ahead and render this. And this is the render that came out from that. And you can see it has that really nice soft edges. It has those walls that are a little bit fuzzy, but not too sharp. And, it has like this variance. In general, if you do want something like the Ray-Ban to pop out more, you could make a separate shader for that and up the density. So instead of, let's say, 0.2, you could switch it to like a 0.4 if you wanted. So for example, under the Ray-Ban, I could just duplicate this and turn this to 0.4. And that would produce a slightly more dense Ray-Ban glasses. I could also choose colors in here if I wanted to choose it. But in general, I actually like to tweak it in Photoshop later if I'm going to add color. So I'm going to open this in Photoshop. And here I do invert, so I do Control I. You could obviously do this in Blender Composite Tool as well. And then I tweak the levels. So basically I want the darks to be a little darker, the lights to be a little lighter, and kind of tweak this however you think looks good. Something like that I think looks pretty good. And then if I want to add color here, again, I could have done it just in the shader, but I also think it's kind of cool just to have the freedom to paint it. So I create a new layer on top and I use soft light, and I can just, paint directly on top of it. And I could do Control U and tweak the colors. And, I could continue to paint and have, what I think is a pretty interesting effect. And I think it's quite resemblant or similar to a lot of these over here. So that's it for the tutorial. If you liked it, please drop a like and a subscription, and I'll catch you in the next one.